Hello and welcome to Jackson's Job. Today you will learn how to make an enriched short crust pastry, pâte Foncer, or another fancy pie dough. The ingredients are just as easy as their traditional short crust pastry, and it's even easier to work with due to adding an egg yolk. You'll find yourself using this method quite a bit in your pie making endeavors. Because of the addition of the egg, this is a pastry great for using in molds, not just pie and tart shells. First, we need one large egg, 50 grams, separated. We do not need the egg white for this recipe, so try making an omelet or save it for macarons or maybe even a meringue for your future pies. We don't need that egg white as it tends to make things puffy and chewy. Not the texture we're after here, right? Second, in a large bowl, we have 1.5 cups of all-purpose or plain flour. That's 225 grams. To that, we add a bit of salt, which is 1/8 teaspoon or 0.625 grams. The salt helps the water distribute through the flour and adds a little bit of flavoring. Mix the flour and salt together, and then we are going to add the butter using the rub-in method. This is where you rub the flour and the cubes of cold butter between your fingers until you get a flour coated with the fat. You'll need 1/2 cup or 113 grams of cold butter or margarine. You can also use lard or vegetable shortening, or even a combination of any of these fats. If you do use lard or shortening, you will need to add a bit more water because butter and margarine isn't 100% fat. There is liquid in their makeup. So keep that in mind when you decide to use lard or shortening. But man, I'm telling you, a pie shell made with lard is amazingly good. This is the second of the 4 types of short crust pastry that we have been going over. This is also perfect for savory dishes. In fact, this type of short crust pastry is often translated as darkening paste and was never intended to be eaten. Rather, it was a paste applied to both meat and vegetables to protect them from burning in the fireplace way back before modern ranges were invented. It would protect the ended meal from being burnt or dried out. Pretty clever when you think about it. As time went by, people began to make short crust pastries to be both tasty and protective. They are more of a decadent vessel than anything, a yummy, fat-laden container of goodness. Are you feeling any more confident now that you are learning the second of the 4 main types of short crust pastry? You really should be. This pastry is even easier to work with than the traditional. That egg yolk does a miracle to the short crust. You'll love the changes when it comes to handling it. It holds together much better when you're rolling it out, and it's easier to shape into a pie crust. The next 2 will be sweetened, so keep following along to become a master at making pie dough. When it comes to short crust pastry, the flour should be twice the amount of fat by weight. Now, because I'm showing you US measurements, it's off by a gram, but that's okay. That amount won't break the dough. If you are using a scale, go ahead and make that 226 grams of flour to be precise. As you work the butter into the flour, you will end up with a breadcrumb consistency that will range from the size of a grain of sand up to the small pea. This is exactly what you're after, not a uniform appearance, as this will give you a beautifully crisp and tender crust. Third, we will need to add some liquid. I'm using 3 tablespoons of water, which is 45 milliliters. And to that, we are going to add 1 teaspoon or 5 milliliters of white vinegar or lemon juice. The acid in the vinegar or lemon juice will delay gluten formation and make the pastry more tender and easier to roll out. To the water and the vinegar, we want to beat in 1 egg yolk, which weighs about 20 grams. This just helps it mix better and you won't have chunks of egg in your pastry since you don't want to overwork that dough. The egg will help bind everything together, which also means the dough won't be as flaky as traditional. However, you will get a dough that is more sturdy and user-friendly. If you noticed, I'm using a butter knife to mix the pastry dough. This helps bring everything together without melting the butter. Doing this will ensure you don't end up with a greasy taste or cracker type consistency in the end. By the way, the liquid will vary, but a good rule of thumb is half the weight of the fat. So that's about 56 grams. Since there is no US measurement for that equivalent, we have modified the recipe to make it easier for the beginner. Feel free to experiment with the water content as you gain confidence, or try milk instead of water. See how these adjustments can change the texture and taste of the dough. Finally, we need to shape the dough. After you've gotten to the point that the knife is no longer bringing anything together, pour it all out onto a clean work surface. This will be called the pickup stage. We will be using both our hands and the pastry dough to pick up any crumbs that haven't yet incorporated. You don't want to knead the dough, but rather squeeze, gather, and gently fold the crumbs into one cohesive unit. Take your time here and go very slow. Kneading the dough will only create gluten, and you want to be as gentle as possible. After the dough is combined, you will shape it into a disc. Pat this disc into a shape no taller than 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. And if you have the room in your fridge, pat it even shorter so it'll be even easier to roll out when you're ready to bake those pies and pastries. Wrap it up well and let it sit in the fridge for a good 2 hours. Overnight is even better, as you can develop even more flavors and a better texture. You can leave the pastry in the fridge for about a week or the freezer for several months. You just need to bring it slightly below room temperature when you're ready to use it. And yes, you need to chill this pastry dough. It's rather important. It does two things. It lets the glutens relax and ensures that you get a tender and crisp pie shell. It also allows the butter to chill down and creates those desirable flaky layers. One thing I like to do is make short crust pastry the day before I need it. That way I don't have to wait for hours just for the next step. And that's it. After we learn all the types of short crust pastry, we will go over how to roll out the dough, create some borders, and how to blind bake your crust. That way no more soggy bottoms to your pies, but rather a crispy and flaky delight. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy baking.